So, good evening, everybody. Nice to be with you again. Thank you for joining. This week I came across a documentary style YouTube video, 1 hour video that spoke about the work of a gentleman in the 1800s, I think it was, or maybe even 1700s, a philosopher that you might have heard of called Baruch de Spinoza. Strangely enough, other than having heard his name here and there over the years, I didn't know much about his work at all. And as I listened to this video, I realized that what his philosophy, he's a very well-known philosopher. His philosophy essentially matches this teaching. Or you could say this teaching matches his philosophy, whichever. And that excited me because for a long time, I've wanted to steer away from using concepts that weren't based on a rational approach to seeing life. So if concepts are too far removed from what we're able to confirm for ourselves in our own daily life, then I don't really like those concepts. And a lot of the concepts in the spiritual seeking, spiritual teaching world fit into that category of being esoteric, you could say, making fairly broad, wide-reaching claims. Now, that's not to say that I have an issue with those teachings. Actually, I think they're very powerful. They might actually be the only way. They were what allowed me to break past certain belief systems and recognize a key aspect of ourself that through our development gets covered up and is very hard to recognize. And so it might be the introduction of concepts like God, an omniscient God, an all-present, ever-present God. It might be through the use of concepts like that, and only through those concepts maybe, that our brain can see what is pointed at. I suspect that that's not the case. I suspect it's not only through those concepts. But what I do acknowledge here is that those concepts are very powerful. However, what they tend to do is they tend to leave a residue, and that is, in a way, a belief system remains in place. Certain things are realized, certain things get known beyond concept, and that's very important. That's, I guess we could call a connection with the part of ourself that ironically or surprisingly we are disconnected from through the sort of development of human life from a baby to a young adult. And then as we carry on in life, we tend to have our attention dragged outwards, meaning we're always looking outwards. And because our consciousness, this thing that is here all the time, is all, that's how the life experience has always been. There's no questioning it, and not only questioning it, there's no awareness that it's there until it's pointed at. And it seems that it needs to be pointed at as the awareness of God in order for eventually there being a recognition of it. So we start off when there is an awakening, usually because the concepts have been pointing to the awareness of God that is functioning through us. And I think that's got something to do with creating a distance in the way that the system processes things. And if it's God's awareness, then the part of us that isn't aware of that awareness can see it as something other than itself. And in that process, it's set up as something other than itself. And through the process, then it gets known. And in the knowing, it's known to be what I am, which is, so this is the irony. It's like it's described as the consciousness of God, and then it's known to be what I am. And so then we realize, as the concept says, we say, oh, well, what is aware here is God's consciousness that is aware through everyone. Now, that might not be the case. It might be that we wake up to our own human consciousness. Now, it doesn't really matter which one it is. It's the same. It's whatever way you label it, whether it's God's consciousness or our human consciousness, that we weren't, the fact is we weren't aware of it. When we become aware of it, we realize it's a very significant thing. And at some point, at least in my case, I had to ask some serious questions. Do I know that this that has been realized, has been seen, that is so important, that what I am calling the core of my experience, or in fact the background, that which enables experience of life to happen, and has some very unique characteristics to it, including an inherent sense of existence, inherent sense of being, which means we don't need to rely on concepts of I exist, I am Roger, I am good, I am bad, I want to do this, I want to go there. So all of that is they're concepts that include in them the I, and in that concept there will be essentially a picture of what this subject that is the center of the concept is. And our own consciousness exists as something much more real, we could say, than an idea or a concept about who we are. And so in knowing that aspect of ourselves, which really is the aspect that is aware of, the other people, aware of the room you're in, that consciousness, when we find ourselves interested in that, prior to any thoughts, prior to any ideas, and it reveals itself, it's very clear that that consciousness is in and of itself alive. It exists. It's undeniable. Now, why I was excited about seeing that what Spinoza wrote about and talked about was very similar to the teaching, is that he was essentially a rationalist. And so that fits very well into what I felt more and more over the last many years that I wanted to adopt in what I shared. And another thing that, meaning that what is said needs to be explainable. And so even if I use words like God's will, there's the concept in the teaching that says whatever is said is a concept and not the truth. So at some point, a seeker who's listening might ask themselves, might question a lot of the concepts and say, how can I know that this concept makes sense and is accurate? And a lot of the concepts that are used are very down to earth and verifiable, or don't require a lot of questioning as to whether we put ticks next to them. It's sort of like I'm saying the table is red, and you can look at the table, and if it's red, then you can say, yep, that's a good concept that I am not just believing. So an example of that is that we will experience pleasure if circumstance is in line with our preference. So that's just really a description. It makes sense, right? That when there is pleasure, it is because the circumstance or the input is pleasurable. It means it's in line with our preferences. Now, sure, we can always say, how do we know that that's really why pleasure arises? Can we be sure that it isn't an illusion, that meaning it isn't a trick, that whenever something that we like, a drink that we like, for example, when we drink it, we go, oh, that's so nice, a cool drink in summer, that's so pleasurable. Someone might say you don't know that you're experiencing pleasure because of the fact that you're drinking the drink and it aligns with your preferences. Now, I acknowledge that, but when life consistently unfolds in ways that can, the word consistently, where it is verifiable and testable time after time, that the correlation exists, and we go beyond there just being correlation, and we see that it is appearing as causation, then it's good enough for us to run with that being one of the rules of how things work. Understanding that on a potentially there is a deeper level or a deeper set of causation, or might even be that on what we might call a more ultimate level, the notion of causation doesn't even exist. That might be the case. It doesn't matter if we are investigating life all from one level, as long as we are correct in the descriptions and the concepts we have, and as long as life continues to remain consistent, then those concepts are good enough to run with. They're not going to cause us trouble. Now, why do some teachings say use notions that do not rely on what can be observed in daily life and actually put it all down to a trick of consciousness, a trick of God, essentially, a trick of the creator to create the impression of cause and effect? The reason is that if a teaching steps out of affirming what we're so used to and brings into play a different explanation, I won't even say a different causation, because that other explanation doesn't rely on or doesn't assume causation exists. It just says that everything is arising for no and from no cause. If if there is a cause attributed to it, it is consciousness, that everything is consciousness, that the appearance is consciousness in that form, in that moment, and it is consciousness aware of itself. And if there is pleasure, then the pleasure is not because of the food or the drink, but the pleasure is what is arising in the moment. And it might, if anything, be explained as just appearing to be because of the food or the drink. Now, as I said, that sort of teaching is very valuable. It's a different teaching, and so I don't have to, and all teachings don't have to fall in line with that. So, if things are understood on the level where we live, then that's good enough. And in particular, they need to be understood relative to certain objectives and relative to certain pursuits that are going on. So the notion of God's will is there essentially to challenge the deeply ingrained idea that we are the ones that are in control of everything that is happening, in control of our thinking, in control of our feelings, in control of the outcomes after we carry out a set of actions or implement a plan. And that's essentially a misguided idea. A lot of what is happening in life, even if we look at it from a causal effect, a lot of what's happening in life is happening prior to the fact that we even become aware of it, prior to the conscious part of ourself becoming aware of, let's say, even thoughts. If we look at it, it surprisingly it is obscured from our view, but it's not particularly complicated to understand that thoughts and cognition of all sorts of things in the environment by the body is happening in a neural network with trillions, billions and trillions of connections and neurons. And the human body-mind organism is an amazing instrument. But how we function is not really my doing. So this is something that's pointed out with the aid of the notion or the concept that says everything happens according to God's will. And what I mean by God is life, how life unfolds. And so in this documentary, I was very pleased to hear that the narrator said that when Spinoza speaks about God, he often says God or nature. And he says everything is causal, and we tend not to look at the causes accurately, and we tend not to see that even if we see a cause just before an outcome, then there is a cause before that cause and a cause before that, and so on. So essentially, one cause turns into an effect, and then that effect becomes the cause of the next effect, and the next effect becomes the cause of the next effect, and so on. And we tend to draw sort of a mental circle around the cause and effect stream that we acknowledge or that we recognize in relation to something that happens, without realizing that essentially what's happening now, these words are a consequence of this sequence of cause and effect initiating from the beginning of time. And so that's what's meant by everything is a happening according to God's will. It's so complex. The stream of causation is, there's so many variables that we couldn't work out what was part of the stream of causation. The best way to say it is this is happening, and everything else that is happening simultaneous to this is happening because of everything down to the smallest detail that has happened from the beginning of time. And that's what's meant by God's will. And I often like to use the word life. Everything is happening according to life. Life to me means the flow of the rivers, the shining of the sun, the growing of the plants, the interaction of humans with each other, and the unfolding of everything, moment after moment after moment, is all happening in what we can call life. And it's not separate from life. It is life. Life is inherently one with, and everything is made of life. Now, another of the tenets in Spinoza's teaching is, he said that we need to understand, we need to have adequate understanding of what's going on in life. And the ordinary person, someone who hasn't found themselves inquiring, is driven by a lack of adequate understanding, which is very similar in this teaching to what's described as misunderstanding. And he includes in his set of concepts the fact that we are going to be driven by a move towards our own personal satisfaction. That's an inevitable way that the human will move. We'll always move biologically towards our preference and move biologically away from things that are painful to us. And that's very different to the notion of attachment to outcomes. It's talking about the movement on a biological level. It's like if I got offered some food and there were a choice of dishes on the table, then even without an attachment to getting, let's say, the food that is my absolute favorite. And what I mean by that is, let's say there's only one more serve and someone in front of me takes the last serve of the food that is my absolute favorite. Now, I know what my preference is, and it was that food, for example. And that's just a fact. Attachment to outcome talks or refers to our internal attitude to whether we actually get what we want or not. So without attachment to outcome, we will see the last serving of the food that is our favorite get taken, and it's now off the table. It's not an option anymore. So we look at what's left, and we will have a biological preference for one thing over another, and we will pick that. It doesn't make sense that we look at the table. One, as we all know from our experience, we don't look at a table with a whole range of foods and say, I like them, I am indifferent to the foods. We have a set of preferences, and they're the biological preferences. And it's very important. This is part of adequate understanding of how things work. So we have a preference, and we will move towards our preference. We're not going to then pick the food that is our least preferable. We'll pick the food that is our preference. And so Spinoza talks about how we will be driven or experience life on three levels. I think he said the joyful effects, the sad effects, and desires. And essentially, the joyful means pleasure, the sad means pain, and desire is talking about someone driven by vices and short-term views on things. And that equates to living life through attachment to pleasure, different to moving towards pain in the moment. So essentially, what I'm getting at is that the methodology of providing descriptions about our daily life that allows someone who has heard those descriptions to inquire for themselves, to look at what is happening in daily life and then start seeing it through the lens of the descriptions that have been provided. That leads to more adequate understanding of life. And I hope that many people listening have seen that over time, the concepts can't help but be observed in your own daily life. Sometimes a particular concept will be observed over and over and over. It's the one that you might be working on for a period of time, and you see it over and over for a period of weeks. And at some point, it just becomes known to you that, yes, in each moment, life is going to deliver sometimes pleasure and sometimes pain. It's not a complicated concept. And yet, unless it's given to us and we then start to first process it intellectually and then start processing it via an experience of it, seeing it in action in our own life, unless that happens, we just continue to go through life expecting life to be pleasure, 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 which really means we have no way of harmoniously reconciling with those moments when we stub our toe. And what I mean by harmoniously reconciling when we stub our toe, I don't mean that we're not going to feel pain. I don't mean that we don't let out a yelp or even a swear word. That makes sense given that it's not our preference. What doesn't make sense once that becomes deeply ingrained, and some of the other concepts become deeply ingrained, is a continuation of the psychological commentary that overlays the stubbing of our toe in a way, for example, that is blaming ourselves for being clumsy, not paying attention, or blaming the other for leaving things on the floor. Once again, let's look at the nuance here. If someone does leave things on the floor and you continually bump into them, there's no problem with pointing out to them that this is not ideal because it's dangerous. But having done that, understand that the outcome is not in your control. The reality is that the day after, you might find yourself stubbing your toe again on an item left on the floor by someone who you had asked the day before to not leave it there. And that's life. That is life, God's will, unfolding in such a way that pain is being delivered to you. It might seem like it makes sense for us to throttle the person and say, it's your fault. How many times do I have to tell you? And that's what we tend to do. Now that attitude is going to lead to an uncomfortableness internally, that when we realize that what we're looking for is the absence of that uncomfortableness, and we realize that this attitude is essentially perpetuating that which we would like not to be there, then it starts to make sense that attitude of blame, that attitude of insisting that life is always pleasure, 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 may start to get cut off. That doesn't mean that it's going to stop happening straight away, but there will be over time a reduction of the habituated movement as a part of ourself realizes this is just an attitude to life that has been put in place a long time ago. It's habituated. And as we start seeing beyond the validity of it, then that old pattern tends to fall away. And the period of time in which we have the attitude of doership and attachment to outcomes gets shorter and shorter and shorter before, so it gets cut off quicker and quicker, we could say. Eventually, it doesn't even need to be cut off. It doesn't arise in the first place. I see that there's a lot of hands up, so I will open the floor up and see where the questions lead us. Hi, Francois. Maybe Francois. Oh, yeah, there you go. Just 1 minute. We have to unmute you. Oh, maybe you have to unmute yourself, Francois.
Okay. Now you can hear me. Yes?
Yes.
Okay. So I think I'm always the first, and that's it. That's the way it is. And I didn't hear the beginning of your thing, but I get the whole point about Spinoza, and as I know him a little bit. And in fact, I wanted to share some insights that just came up. And maybe will be very interesting because of what you say today. And it's quite new for me because he come back about the fundamental about your teaching, about what we are looking for, even if we don't realize it.
Mm-hmm.
And as you may remember, our first interaction, I was really telling you about my seeking for the truth. And the title of the video you put was about happiness in daily living and true nature, two ends in one. So it was like the two faces of the coins. Mm-hmm. And anyway, I go straight to my insights, and was about it was always for me an important thing. It was the why life has been here, why the source needed life as a mean for a reason. And it was like in some concepts there is like for no reason he wake up from his resting, and that's the way it is. And for me as a human, we have nothing that is not directly interesting for the source. I would say God for easiness for me. And so it was like there is a reason why life does exist. And it was like exactly as all teachings are, a methodology, a tool. And for me, it was like life is a tool for God and only for him, because he's the only thing that does exist for real. And as we are instrument, it's not so much about what we can get from life, but about our destiny. And destiny is a tool, is destined to be what it is, a tool. And as we are billions on this earth, we are specific tools who really need to fulfill our purpose. And that will be sometimes feeling this peace of mind, sometimes feeling this I am consciousness, sometimes feeling I'm a guy that is very happy to live in this life and has fulfilled what he thought was his mission in his life, whatever it is. But it's like, yes, we are all instrument for one thing, that is the reality, the source. And let's see what, if you have to say something about
it. So this was the insight that you had, right?
Yeah, because it's just me, and I will let you talk after, because last time we talked, I was so much into peace of mind for what, and it was my insight at the time was for enjoying my life as François. And in fact, I realized that it was not right, completely accurate. I mean, God is not working for me. I'm supposed to work for God. In some kinds, it's like it's not, it's not for me. Life is not for me as François. I am, in a sense, for the source.
Mm. Yes. Well, there's lots of yes. So I guess you're saying we're all instruments of, or the source is everything. So you and I are expressions of source. We are parts of source, and so everything is happening exactly as it's meant to happen. Meaning exactly as it does happen. And so in each moment we're fulfilling our destiny. We can't possibly not fulfill our destiny on the basis of what you're saying, and I agree with it. We could take it a step further and question the idea of source being something conscious, let's say, because we have this idea that source has created or turned into life, or the whole universe. And we could actually sort of say, well, is that true? Do we know source has turned into life? And well, that's definitely true as long as we just call source as a placeholder, something that we say is before, or the energy that all this has come from. But it's quite possible that the universe, as it's described to have happened, this burst of energy, and then an evolution of complexity that happens, that is source, but source is not aware of what is happening. And out of that chaos that started, a pattern emerged, or life, the solar systems and the galaxies formed. And at least on Earth, quite possibly many other places, then the simple became more and more complex, and intelligence became a feature of the developing complexity. And all of that developing complexity is no doubt part of life. But do we know for sure that there is a source behind it that is aware of what is happening? What we do know is that I am part of life, you are part of life. Therefore, it's very helpful to see life as a whole. But the only consciousness that and intelligence that we're aware of is in the parts of life that we can observe, where we can see intelligence at play. in primarily animals, but also in inanimate or non-organic systems. So we can see intelligence in, let's say, computers, although that you could argue is a byproduct of humans, which are in and of themselves intelligent. And there is intelligence in plants, that there is a system that organizes itself, and proteins are built. So there is intelligence in play in a lot of aspects of the whole. But we have to question. So we know our own consciousness. You can't know someone else's consciousness, but you can know that you are conscious, and I am conscious, and I am part of the whole. That is undeniable. And the whole is unfolding, and I am essentially animated in each moment because of the nature of the whole, because of the nature of life, and in a way that demystifies what is happening. And it's still destiny. Whatever happens in life is destiny unfolding. But our definition of destiny then changes from destiny driven by a conscious source that is making destiny happen to destiny happening as a result of how life has fallen into place, without there necessarily being an orchestrator of it all, as in a conscious orchestrator. There is an orchestrator, and that is life. At very least, it's the laws of physics and all of the other laws that exist in the universe. That is what is orchestrating how things unfold. It's what's determining and dictating how things unfold. But it doesn't require consciousness. There is consciousness, and it's our own consciousness which we are able to be aware of. And so reducing it down, as I have, it's not really reducing it down. It's taking out some ideas that we tend to superimpose on life, and when we question them, we say, I don't really know that that's exactly what's happening. I don't really know that there is a conscious source that has made all this happening. When we reduce we strip that out, it doesn't actually make life less interesting. All of the things that we can realize about ourselves and about our life, gratitude, amazement at the fact that, how am I here, other than saying, I'm here because of the complexity, or because of how life has unfolded. But when we look at that, we go, well, it's quite a mystery. And especially when we start looking at language and thought and how all the processes happen in the body, it's completely mysterious and awesome. So it doesn't, and our own consciousness is still what it always has been. So the important factors don't get stripped away if we change our notion of what source is.
Yeah, but maybe because it's your way to have always an accuracy about the mysterious, about I know that I cannot know. And this concept, I know that I cannot know, it's a knowing by itself. It's a very intelligent knowing, to realize that I cannot know. But when you know something, even this cannot know, it comes from somewhere, and you cannot do as it's not here. So when you have an insight, you can have another insight another time that contradicts this one, but each time it's here. And the idea you put that an energy that will not be conscious can create something conscious, it's like, for me, it contradicts the idea of destiny and everything we know about not having the control. It's like something less will create something more. And I think it's not possible. It's like the idea of a monkey that will type on a machine, will write a sentence one moment. It's like that's so improbable. Yeah, so unlikely that it is like that. So it's interesting to imagine that it's a possibility, but it's not the probability. And that's why the teaching of every humans about wisdom and all this have come up with this one source, with its intelligence, and about the fact that, especially in the, I will say, non-duality and Advaita, it's about that source at rest and source in manifestation has to become manifest because it's source. And when it's manifest, it's Sat, Chit, Ananda. And that's what some tools will experience, this Sat, Chit, Ananda, because it's what the source is when it's manifesting.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. See, that's a concept, right? All of that. So what
Yeah,
if,
of course.
what if our own consciousness, the consciousness of the human, when we are manifesting, I mean, when we exist, when we come into life, that the realization of our own consciousness is Sat Chit Ananda, then when we realize it, that's what we are going to experience, right? Consciousness being bliss is Sat Chit Ananda. So the base of our experience, or the base of who we are, is a conscious being. Because there is consciousness in the nature of consciousness, we know ourselves to exist, that is the being. And there is peace or joy as a result of recognizing that. Maybe, I just say maybe that is a characteristic of the human being and not a characteristic of the source prior to the human being. Now, what I very much agree with, and I was, before I put my alternative concept, let's say, to what you said, put forward, what I almost said is that, what's most important is what is true for us at this point in time. That's what's most amazing, what feels real for us in this moment. And so that remains, that is correct. But as you said, our insight that we have today is often replaced by essentially the progression of insight that keeps happening for us. When we look at it with and look at the complexity, we say, how could this complexity come about? It's not possible unless the source is intelligent. But if we go back to very early on, when there was, let's say, a random mixing of all of these variables, and we acknowledge that it might be more possible that very, very simple intelligence came about as a result of the mixing of certain things over millions, billions of years, then we have an explanation as to how this complexity could have eventuated, because the answer then is, it eventuated from intelligence. But it started off as very basic intelligence. And so when the intelligence was very basic, there wasn't much intelligent structure. But as the intelligence then operated, the intelligence became more complex. And so what we are now seeing are systems that are generated by intelligence. So when we look at it now and we look at the complexity, we say, it's not possible for this to have happened randomly. But as soon as basic intelligence was formed, then randomness stopped being the driver of everything that exists now. So everything exists now as a result of intelligence, but intelligence could have started off as a very simple intelligence and then became more complex because of intelligence. That's just one of the thought patterns that I came up with to explain what you just, because I had the same, I ran with the same concept for a long time. It's not possible for consciousness to come out of something that is not conscious. It's not possible for more complexity to stem from a source that is less complex. And I guess at some point I saw the error in that notion. It made a lot of sense to me, but at some point I thought maybe I just haven't looked at it correctly, and maybe there is a reason how this complexity can be explained without there being a conscious source. I don't know that that's the case, but I always like to point us past concepts that may just be fanciful, even though they make a lot of sense and seem like the most probable solution. I am very open to the notion that there is an intelligence prior to this manifestation, but that intelligence might be something like even a kid playing on their computer, as opposed to the intelligence, the consciousness that we imagine. So the reality is this world we know may well be a computer manifestation. Just appears to the avatars inside that virtual world, and therefore the reality is that outside of that computer virtual world there is an intelligence from where it all stemmed. So one way or another there is a source. If there was this explosion of heat and chemicals and whatever, according to the Big Bang theory, which is just a theory, then that impulse, that energy, had to come from a source.
Yeah, and I think this insight came in me was about always reconciliate everything and the idea of some I would say enlightenment for some according to their destiny, and like the other tools or the other humans will wait for another. It was not for the time. Was like did not make sense for me completely. It's like for me everything was exactly at its place. So it was like missing nothing. Everything was perfect. So it was the purpose of life was not for having peace of mind for everybody. It was for something else, and that's why I came up with this concept about the source, because that's the idea, the concept of it comes all from the one self. And so if there is a selfish thing, that's God, and it's working only for him. So if it's a God that needs to evolve, he may be a start as a low intelligence and as evolve through a cycle of life and go back to his rest, and again maybe, or maybe he evolve more and more, I don't know. But there is something about the idea of some humans will be recognizing their own true nature of the source, and some others will not, without I would say, any understandable reason for me. I needed to integrate everything that does exist in life according to my mind.
Mm. Well, there's no doubt that the notion of destiny and destiny, whatever we have at the beginning of destiny or the driver of destiny, doesn't really matter. The reality is if we're running with a concept of destiny, it's a very freeing notion that will lead to a lot of peace of mind. So anything else is just refining around the edges, and it's not really that important, although it's bound to happen as time goes on, one way or another. I might refine my idea back to a conscious source. I mean, the reality is that it's my consciousness that I say, well, comes from somewhere, let's say, and it's a big mystery.
Yeah, and maybe just for me to finish, it was a maybe you know this concept about the truth or the source, whatever, as an elephant, and there is all these enlightened people who are blind and touch the elephant at different part of it and describe it as they touch it, but there is nobody who have the whole pictures.
Mm-hmm.
And it was about the fact that
excuse me, may I say something? Excuse me to interrupt. It's not very polite, but can I say something, Francois? Do you have a little respect? Do you recognize that there are more people having the hand up? I feel like I'm listening.
I'm gonna finish. Sorry, I finish. I'm done. Sorry for everything. Okay, Roger.
That's good. Thanks, Francois. Nice talking to you.
Thank you, Roger.
Okay. Timsy. Hello.
Why I had my hand up too? I was the second one. Why this?
I'm sorry, Holger. You just disappeared off the screen. I thought you vanished.
Okay,
after...
good. And Roger, with deepest respect and gratitude, and I don't want to be dumb and rude or something, but it really pushed my buttons. Because we can be lost in talking and talk forever. And
sure, yes.
where is the balance of keeping it again respectfully on point where we really want to be, because our time is so precious here.
Yes, well, let's. I have no problem with how things unfolded, so all is well.
Okay, good. Then for you, all is well. It's nice. For me, it's not well. Just do we have a responsibility with this teaching? Does it need to be shared with the world, or is this just a private entertainment that is only intended to make us feel good in the moment?
Well, I think that the framework itself, or the teaching itself, is something that delivers something far more powerful than just a temporary entertainment. I think that the whole structure is essentially aimed at us, at our belief structure, the psychological self collapsing. And so if it sets in, then it delivers a basis on which then it is otherwise, and far more.
Thank you. Some days ago, I went out shopping and I saw two people sitting on the street, homeless people begging for money. And for some reason, it just deeply touched me. And to see that this whole mess in this world, I could just call it mess temporarily, it's just based on a little misunderstanding. Isn't it correct? I mean, the sense of lack that makes us yeah, maybe you can finish the sentence. I mean, it's just a teeny misunderstanding that makes this whole world a big mess on one level.
Well, I think that if we didn't have misunderstanding in the world, it would be very different. So, yes, the more understanding that comes into the world, the more harmony and the more efficient I think things will be. But you know, when someone is on the street begging, for example, that and this might not be what you were saying, but let's just point out that might not be due to their misunderstanding. So someone might find themselves in very troublesome circumstances, even if they have a wisdom. The understanding, at least for that person, will mean that the extra layer of suffering beyond the circumstantial pain of, let's say, being hungry or being cold, maybe even getting sick because of being out on the street and ultimately dying, that unfortunate circumstance, which essentially you could say is not much different to, you know, finding yourself facing a tiger one day in a field and having to and dying because of the interaction. So it's a circumstance, and the wisdom will mean that even in that situation, it'll be understood to be not personal, let's say, not because of something that you did. And from the perspective of the person seeing the homeless person on the street, any number of reactions are going to arise, and all of them, to me, make sense. Someone will feel sad and give them some money. Someone will say, if I give them money, they'll just stay there forever because they'll have an easy life getting money from people. And all of those reactions make sense.
For example, I mean, if we zoom out a little bit and look at humanity, and we could do much better. I mean, if someone kicks a puppy on the street, a little puppy, then it would be in the news. But it's so poor. I mean, we as humanity, it's such a ridiculous state I feel right now we are in. And I don't want to push anything or something. I'm just experiencing my energies right now. I acknowledge that there's a theoretical understanding, yes. And I acknowledge that there's a nervous system that maybe needs to be discharged on a certain level, yes. But is there anything we can do together to promote non-duality? Is there such a need in life? Or I just don't know right now, and I'm sorry if I sound a little bit agitated or something, or not structured, but so much blah, blah. I feel, allow me this word, blah, blah. Life is precious.
If you do too much blah, blah, Francois is going to come and shoot you down.
No, but not a problem. At least we do something together and we maybe hug each other. It's wonderful. But being isolated by ourselves and just forever rattling in the head, it's not a solution.
Well, yes. I mean, ultimately, I think the teaching is aimed at delivering one's own peace of mind. And as we change, then our actions in the world will change. But I think we end up going very easily into conceptual ideas of saving the world, or how do we achieve outcomes that maybe are beyond our reach.
Okay, not okay, beyond our reach, but what is in our reach? I mean, we spend so much thinking energy in formulating concepts, and we have a big bucket of really good concepts. Can they be kind of promoted? Can they be shared in an intelligent way with the world? Is there any way to serve our neighbors who are maybe lost in their thinking?
Well, first, we need to be sure that we're not lost. that is the first, port of call. The question of sharing it is secondary.
Could Frank be muted? Thank you.
Yeah, so that's what I would suggest. First, we need to find the concepts have transformed us. And before that point happens, I would suggest any notion of sharing is probably part of the misunderstanding.
But there is a sharing among peers, and there is a feedback loop. And so we are here in a safe environment. And when are we ever perfectly ready to share? What is the benchmark of clarity that makes you ready to share with the world?
My answer is, if you have, to whatever degree you have peace of mind, that determines the capacity to share. On the other hand, there is a much more practical solution to helping the world, and that is, you say, I can't solve world poverty, but I can give this person $10 or 10 euros. Or I don't want to have to keep wondering who I'm going to give money to each day. I'm going to put in place donations that come out of my bank once a month to a series of charities that you have faith in. And then you say, well, I might not be able to save, everyone from being hungry, but this is what I have decided to do to contribute to the problem, contribute to fixing the problem.
Thank you, Roger, for your precious time. I think we can do better, but I don't have much words right now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Johannes, I think I don't. I only see. I don't know if is Johannes next. Johannes, you're next.
Hey, Roger.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Long time no see.
Oh, look, it's I didn't recognize you. Yes, it has been a long time.
Yeah. So I met you first time back in 2015.
Yes,
and
I remember.
It made a huge impact on my life. And yeah, since then, the teachings have been landing in my system slowly. Periods of really, a lot of peace have landed in my system, and then it seems like I've been becoming to deeper layers, and then new kind of disturbance have appeared, and then I've worked through that. So yeah, and it seems like I don't know how to make sense of life actually, but sometimes it seems like that the pain or the trouble just gets more intense or more complex, and therefore it gives the chance of having a peace on a new level. This is my daughter, Frida.
Oh, Peter, did you say?
Frida.
Frida, okay.
It means peace in German, actually.
Okay, very nice.
Yeah. Yes, I live family life now. Yeah. So sometimes I experience situations where I realize, oh, this would be a situation that was very intense and tough for me just a few years ago, and now I'm in it in a peaceful way.
Mm-hmm.
Not much of non-acceptance in the situation. In the Christian tradition, I think they call it the tryings, or like we're being tried by God, something like that. It feels like that, but I don't know how to make sense of it, because then there should be some kind of God, as you just talked about, having a plan and trying us out or something. So I don't know, but I'm very grateful for the peace landing in my system, even though I've been impatient many times, wanting it to land earlier. But now I have this little guru learning me, teaching me a lot about peace and being in life.
I can imagine. Well, you know, sometimes all the talking about peace of mind and the understanding the concepts and all of that makes it sound like, okay, now this is what I need to do. You know, this is what I'm in control of. And really the underlying concept. So if someone messages me and says, you know, what am I to do? I have all of these voices in my head. I'm restless. I find myself blaming the other. And from my perspective, when I go, that, yes, that's destiny, meaning the way your brain is structured, is that's your experience. And it might change if you find yourself listening to certain teachings, but there's no guarantee about that. And in fact, the likelihood, actually, when we think about it, is it's not going to change, because, I mean, not that we should be pessimistic, but what we're talking about is a structure of our brain that is, you know, very deeply ingrained. And it's, we do know that the human system is capable of having an attitude towards life where there's a lot more clarity in why things are working the way they are. And clearly that's what we see happening for some people that find themselves exposed to teaching. So you've described how there's much more peace in your life. And so that means that the wiring in the brain has changed. And that's just great fortune, because the truth is you didn't touch a single wire in your brain yourself, as in you didn't know what you were doing. And I didn't know what I was doing. It's just that the right things came in, and the brain, as it was capable, processed them a particular way, and change happens. So sometimes all this talk, making, you know, breaking it down into concepts, make it sound like, oh, it's so simple, I just need to do this and that. And the truth is that all the changes happen in here or here, whatever. And it's really life does it or it doesn't do it. So
yeah, it's very clear to me that it's like that. I just basically showed up now just to show my gratitude. And we were talking, me and my family were talking about going to Tiruvannamalai in the winter, and we were talking about, I hope Roger is there. And then you appeared on my phone, like going live, and I was like, oh, we were just talking about you. And then I just wanted to show my gratitude and tell that, like, when I've been suffering these years, it's 7 years now since I met you first. I've always just put on a video of yours, and it has been working immediately. Every time, there's some kind of magic going on just listening to the concepts and the teachings, and then either the suffering disappears completely, or at least it lowers the level of suffering a lot. So the teaching is really working into my system. So.
That is nice to hear. I get that feedback regularly, and that's what gives me the motivation to keep sharing, because
thank you.
I see that it in the same way as it has sunk in for me, and I continue to learn more, that it's very clear that for many people this same principle is happening. I might be in Tiruvannamalai in January. We'll see. I don't have plans yet, but it would either be late December or January. Yes.
Okay, then I hope it's January, because we can't go in December. And yeah, that would be nice to hang out with you there.
Yes, nice. That would be nice to see you.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
Johannes. Yes, Timsy. Hello.
Hi, Roger.
Hello.
How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good too. It's so interesting to see Johannes' question come right before me, because my question was so related, and I was supposed to go first, but I dropped out of the call, and like fate had it, and his question went first, and it was so related to what I wanted to kind of ask also. So I was thinking that whenever there's more thinking and understanding happening in my system, I tend to be secluded or isolated a little bit. But when I find myself in like a community or family setup, like recently my brother had a baby, so we were over there, and I sort of feel like there's no space anymore for understanding, or there's not much thinking happening in these teachings. And once I leave, it starts. So it just made me feel like, does it imply that if you are inquiring, you tend to be alone or like secluded?
Well, I think that throughout time, the notion of people going off into caves or monasteries has been, or into the mountains, that's been around. And it's in a way because when we are not caught up in our regular everyday life, then there is more space and there is a capacity to break away from habits. Whereas if you're consistently challenged by the things that you are, triggered by, then we might just not have the space. And I can't remember which teacher said it. I think it was not Krishna Das, but another Das. Said, if you think you're enlightened, go and spend a week with your family. Ram Das. Yeah. And so when you especially with family, then I guess it goes back to our roots and anything that was put in place when we were young, which tends to be when a lot of the doership and attachment, unresolved energies get put in place. Well, then I guess when we're with family, that can get triggered, and then there's a lot less space, and maybe even it might not be that you're being triggered, but you're having social time with family and you're busy.
Yeah.
So then the priority changes, and I think that's probably okay and fine and even nice for for periods of time when you're with family. But inevitably, I suspect that if that happened indefinitely, someone who is a seeker will find that at some point they'll say, hang on a sec, I feel like I'm no longer on my true north. And then there'll be a movement back towards, finding space where the seeking becomes a priority.
Yeah. In fact, when there's like, now that there's a baby and there's more like pleasure every day, the baby doesn't talk or revoke or doesn't cause pain. So it's mostly just pleasure. But when there is especially pain, the teaching sort of lands better for me. Because somehow I'm looking for something. But like when there's pleasure, there's the need to look for something is just generally lesser also.
Mm-hmm. Well, yes, that's true. There's a problem with that to some extent. So I think it's very good to enjoy time with your family, especially if it's pleasurable. And that isn't usually going to be something that's always there and always the case. So make the most of it while it's there. But as far as seeking goes, I think it's very important that we don't just keep seeking there and get into it when things aren't working out, because the reality is that when things aren't working out, we tend not to have it's sort of like you need to store your food for winter before winter starts. And so the seeking tends to make us stronger and more resilient, so that when circumstance comes that is not how we would like, then there is some resilience. And if we're always then interested in seeking only when something goes wrong, then maybe that's the wrong motivation. And this is not suggesting that that's the case for you, but I think in general it's important to point out that really we should, hopefully, it's not that we should, but there should, Nisargadatta referred to an earnestness. The earnest seeker is the seeker that finds themselves moving along the path most efficiently. And that earnestness means, even when there isn't a big problem, there is still an interest in inquiring and investigating.
Yeah.
But, if there isn't, then, if we set up this idea, I should be earnest, I should, then that's more of the problem. So, yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. Thank you, Roger.
You're welcome. See you soon.
Yeah.
Hi, Tejas.
Hey, Roger, nice to see you again. So 2 quick things before I ask my question. So first, I really appreciate you being honest in hedging your metaphysical claims, because I find that a lot of teachings are very dogmatic with their metaphysical claims, claiming that, consciousness is what gives rise to everything, what gives rise to matter. And I find they're just as dogmatic as like the physicists who say the opposite. But if we're being honest, yeah, we can't know. So I appreciate that honesty. And then second, yeah, just Holger, your intervention was appreciated, as I'm sure it was by others silently. And then as for the question, so Roger, I saw on your Buddha at the gas pump interview that you said that you used to argue with Ramesh, saying that free will didn't exist because there's no doer, and then he corrected you, saying that no, free will does exist despite there being no doer. But the reasoning, at least based on first person experience, wasn't given in that interview. So I was wondering if you could flesh that out now, especially since this whole conversation is on non-doership. I thought it'd fit in well.
So if someone just came and we started talking, and let's say it was clear that a lot of their suffering was a result of feeling that they were the doer and in control of everything, and that things, let's say, weren't working out, or people around them were doing things that were not how they would like, then I might say, the truth is we don't have any free will. Everything is predetermined, and we're functioning according to our genes and up-to-date conditioning. The other is functioning according to their genes and up-to-date conditioning that is outside of their control. And really, we're all like balls in motion, and we have no free will. Because generally speaking, free will, the word free will, is assumed to mean that we're in control, that we are the ones that are independently and autonomously through our own volition, deciding everything. So the subject is seen to be, I am the subject, without an appreciation of the systems, the complex systems that actually even bring rise to the very thought I exist, or I like that. The thought I like that comes from, you know, the complexity of our brain, etc. And that's just not how we experience ourselves. If in life, before we've asked any questions, the experience is, I chose to say this and I chose to feel this way. It's all about it. It just feels like I am the doer. So we might say you have no free will. As you know, in the teaching, instead of free will, what is used is non-doership as the main way of describing no free will, or what is normally what normally would be spoken of as no free will in the teaching is referred to as, we are not the doers. Everything is happening. Our thoughts are happening, our emotions are happening, actions are happening, speaking is happening. And so free will in the teaching framework is essentially something a little different to doership. In the teaching, the word free will is referred to how things appear in practice, as opposed to the theoretical understanding of how things actually work. And it's very important for us at some point to realize that there are these two different ways of seeing, or these two different positions from where life can be seen. Now, the example is that a very common example used is that the sun, we say the sun rises and the sun sets. So from our perspective on Earth, the sun seems to be rising and setting. We know that in reality, that's not what's happening. So the concept, the theoretical concept, is the sun doesn't move, and the Earth, the globe, is moving relative to the sun. But we don't in practice say, oh, the Earth is moving relative to the sun. We say the sun is rising or the sun is setting. And they're both correct, because we understand both in relation to each other. Now, if someone didn't understand the notion that the sun isn't moving and the Earth is moving, and it appears like, if someone didn't understand that and they say the sun is rising and the sun is setting, they're essentially, they don't understand the totality of what's going on in relation to that notion. But if someone does understand, they're not now going to be precluded from saying the sun is rising and the sun is setting. In fact, their understanding would be causing a new problem if they were precluded from saying, I'm watching the sunrise, or I'm watching the sunset. So in that situation, if someone understands the theoretical notion that the sun isn't moving, and they can't find themselves seeing that in practice it makes sense to say the sun is rising and the sun is setting, then the theoretical understanding is preventing a more integrated understanding, or more integrated expression of the understanding. So free will in the teaching is in practice, we experience life as if we are free to do whatever we like in the moment. when we open the fridge, there is no sense that I can't choose the orange juice. We know that my choice to choose the orange juice is a result of my genes' up-to-date conditioning, which includes my preferences, my tolerance for orange juice, let's say. And so on the one hand, I could say I have no free will. It's dictated by my genes and up-to-date conditioning. And that's correct. And it's very important for us to understand that. But if we miss the fact that in practice in life, in each moment, I'm free to do whatever I like. Now, what happens is when we're focused on the theoretical for so long, as soon as this comes up and I go, but in practice, I'm free to do what I like, our brain goes, no, I'm not free to do what I like because everything is dictated by my genes and up-to-date conditioning. And that's the issue I had when Ramesh said, but Roger, in the moment, you have complete free will to do whatever you like. And so my head was like, what are you talking about? We have no free will. Everything is happening according to God's will. Everything is destiny. I am dictated by my genes and up-to-date conditioning. And I just couldn't see how the two concepts were not contradictions. But until I acknowledged and recognized that, yes, that's the theory, and theory doesn't mean it's just theory and it has no place in life. Theory has place in life as part of the understanding. So it's very important that we understand any suffering that arises as a result of my genes and up-to-date conditioning, any good outcomes or good actions that lead to good outcomes as a result of my genes and up-to-date conditioning. That is very important in relation to our attitude towards outcomes, in relation to pride, guilt, blame. However, we really need to acknowledge that I'm not a slave in life, because the notion I'm not the doer can imply you are a slave and that you have no freedom. And on the one hand, we can say, well, I have no real freedom because I'm completely dictated by these factors. But in practice, when I realized, but in practice, I'm completely free to do whatever I like. I do not have, in practice, a handcuff around my hand that is linked to source, and source isn't, dragging me here and there against my will. It is, on the one hand, because everything is happening according to my genes and up-to-date conditioning that I'm in control of. But in practice, what I clicked on at this, once this point that Ramesh was making, is that my will, like what feels like my will, what is my want in the moment when I'm looking in the fridge, my will and God's will are not two. They are, my will and God's will are two ends of the one thing. Like a dumbbell, for example, the dumbbell is made up of weights on both sides of the bar, and it's one dumbbell. So God's will and my will are just different ways of looking at the same thing. So I take, on the one hand, I say I picked the orange juice because it was my will to have orange juice. It was what I wanted in the moment, my free will to choose whatever I wanted. And what I chose in the moment was God's will. So it just depends which way you want to look at it. And the thing is, if someone just has one only, that it's all my will or it's all God's will, then what they're missing is the other side of the coin. And the coin has two faces. So in practice, relation to the sun, we need to understand the bigger picture of the sun and we need to be able to relate to the sun from the perspective of a human being on Earth. And if we can do those two things together, so if in a test you're asked, does the sun really rise or set? You would pick no, if that was the point of the question. And at the same time as having said the sun doesn't really rise or set, the next day when someone says, would you like to watch the sunset at the beach tomorrow? Then you would say, yes, that sounds like fun.
Okay, that was really good, Roger. I'm like 99% clear on it, but just to make sure, it's like, let's say I scratch my head right now, right? And then I say in practical terms, I'm freely scratching my head. But then at the same time, at a deeper level, it's like, okay, a thought came up to scratch my head to ensure that I actually got Roger's point. And then an impulse came and I did this. And that's what's happening at the deeper level, but that's not contradictory to the practical level of I'm freely choosing to scratch my head. Or like maybe I'm looking, let's say, at a table right now. At a practical level, I say, okay, the table is solid. But at a deeper level, according to physics at least, which seems to work, it's mostly empty space. But like they're both true. They're both the same. Like, is that what you're saying? Just to
Exactly.
be clear?
Yeah. It's like mechanical physics and quantum physics are two aspects of the one thing. It's not that quantum physics is more real than mechanical physics. Then it's not. You can't live your life according to laws of quantum physics, even though that might be. You live your life according to the laws of mechanical physics. And so when someone understands quantum physics, which then the assumption is, oh, well, mechanical physics is not real. It's not how things are really happening. And you can see that on one level, it is real. They're as real as each other. So in the example you used, I wouldn't necessarily say I'm scratching my head. I can't remember the exact words. It's more in relation for us to realize that there is, in practice, we are completely free to do whatever we want in each moment.
I said I'm freely choosing to scratch my head. That was the example.
Yeah, so you're free to scratch your head whenever you like, but at the same time, you know that you'll only scratch your head when an impulse to scratch your head comes up, and you'll know that. So it's, if you then said, but I'm not free because the only time I'll ever do it is when an impulse comes, and that impulse was created, in my body somewhere, and I didn't control it. I'd agree with you, because I'm not saying it's one or the other. I'm saying it's one and the other.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks, Roger. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for dropping in. Hi, Nathan. Thanks, Tejas.
Oh, hi, Roger. How are you going?
Good. How are you?
Yeah, very well. I've been following your teaching for a long time, and just recently I've been really stuck for quite a while on something that you said, I don't know, it was probably about a year ago. And it was basically like, you sort of can't rest in being because it's veiled by the thinking mind. But then the thinking mind can't be dissolved without resting in being. So I feel like I'm sort of stuck in this catch-22. Just wondering if you can sort of explain that setup.
Yes, it is a bit of a catch-22, and the way that it doesn't end up being a catch-22, meaning the way it can actually happen, is that it's a gradual shift from one to the other. And so the reality is that it's a bit like training, that you can't expect to go and lift 100 kilo weight straight away, but if you start with the smaller weights, eventually the 100-kilo weight might be achievable. And so the thinking mind is so habitual and so consistent, and it's in a way the only way we know how to live. There is no access to what I refer to as being. However, as we find ourselves hearing about beingness, and it's described as something that is available, it's a dimension of human existence. That's why we're called human beings, maybe. So as we hear about it more and more, and one of the descriptions is that it is a place outside of thinking, so we can't get to it by thinking. All of these descriptions, at some point, they feed the working mind with sufficient information that the working mind does something quite surprising. So when I talk about the working mind, the nature of the working mind is to think, right? So someone would say, why are you giving information to the working mind when we're talking about being? Being is not of the dimension of thought. And that's the point, is we are giving the working mind the information that ordinarily what it will do is it will try to process the information in a way that creates thinking. But at some point, the working mind might realize what is actually being said. What's being said is that being is a place outside of thinking. That means stop.
Mm-hmm.
And when the working mind gets that, and in an instant, just maybe for a little thing, there is a stopping. And you can't, the thing is, you can't fake the stopping, because often if we're faking the stopping or trying to do the stopping, that is a movement of mind or movement of thought. And we don't know when it will happen, but if we're interested in that beingness, and we realize it's something that we're not familiar with, we don't have access to it, and it gets registered in the system as something that really is quite important, at some point something is going to be heard, whether it's through me or whether it's not at all through me, and everything that you hear through me actually creates more thought and confusion. And you then put a video on from some other person talking about being, and they talk about things very different to me, and it clicks and you get a glimpse of it. And that's the beginning, hopefully, of a recurrence where maybe a technique starts to grow out of that first time, a technique that works for you. In my case, it was about becoming present with what's here now, and putting attention onto the senses, but without relating to them as relative to the body. So everything that is, there is all the visual, or all the when we say visual, unfortunately, automatically makes it seem like we're talking about the eyes. But if we refer to the present moment and appreciate that maybe all the visuals are not because of the human eyes, but because of the fact that there is consciousness. And that for me is how I found myself dropping out of thought just for a second at a time. And then that period would get longer and longer, and maybe some refinement of how I was relating to this the whole topic would happen. And in time, the shift out of being, which really means transcending the thinking mind. It means that with the help of the working mind, or with the help of a technique, and the help of the working mind is just the working mind might say stop, might understand that the resting in being is about the subsiding of all levels of mind. Now, the working mind might not have the power to subside or to cut off the thinking mind if the thinking mind is particularly strong. But in time, the whole process weakens the intensity of the thinking mind, such that the working mind may have the capacity to cut off the thinking mind, and simultaneously to cutting off the thinking mind, also cutting off itself. And that really is a movement into presence, which is a movement into being.
Yep. Okay, that makes perfect sense. That's pretty much what's been happening. A combination of exactly what you said, sort of noticing the senses, and then also the body being phenomena within consciousness, and so not particularly any more important than the wall or anything like that. And that comes up just randomly. Often, sometimes when I'm watching YouTubes or reading about that non-duality, but then sometimes just randomly during the day as well. So I guess that's a sort of proof of up-to-date conditioning coming in and affecting the system in random times as well. So that's I guess that's a good thing that's happening. I think part of my confusion though is the difference between oneness and resting in being. I'm assuming they're not really the same thing, but I can't tell if they are or not.
Then resting in being is a bit more subtle, I guess, than because there are these peak experiences of oneness that can happen where essentially it doesn't feel at all like the Roger or the Nathan experience we're used to. Not only not at all like, because even resting in being, I guess you could, when it happens for the first time, it's like, oh wow, this is the silence, you're just aware of whatever you're looking at, a dog walking past or the ducks in the pond, and there's just a soft awareness that's happening, and that's quite unusual. But there are these peak experiences of oneness, mind you, within this soft awareness of being, you can appreciate how everything is happening inside that awareness, and that it's not really, it can't be separate from the awareness. If it was separate from the awareness, it essentially means it's outside of the awareness and there wouldn't be awareness of it. Although that's not how we tend to ordinarily relate to things that we're seeing. So ordinarily, the dog appears to be outside of me and not within my awareness. But as we explore this, at some point it becomes clear that if the dog was outside of awareness and separate from awareness, there'd be no awareness of it. And so resting in being has this element of everything is inclusive and contained, but there are these oneness experiences that where that is amplified, where it contains this feeling of absolute truth and this is the reality. And often people, if they've had that oneness experience where the sense of the person is simply obliterated, the obvious conclusion, which is misguided in my view, is that is enlightenment. This is oneness. This is what is talked about in all of non-duality, and that that is what the enlightened being is living, is experiencing life as. And in those in that absolute peak experience, everything that is described in non-dual, there is no person, everything's just arising, everything is one, everything is consciousness. All of those things are absolutely self-evident. And so it would seem like, oh, that is the enlightened state. And many people would now be saying, well, you've just said it. Of course, that's the enlightened state. The thing is, though, in that state, if it were something that were to stay indefinitely, we wouldn't be having a human experience. That oneness experience is sort of, you're living as consciousness, and it's very impersonal. The body has essentially, it's not where life is being seen from, and it's sort of irrelevant. Now, there's a tendency for that to happen, not in this pristine way for a extended period, the pristineness of a oneness peak experience, but a lot of seekers, myself included at the time, can find themselves witnessing what I would call witnessing, which is more or less a state of beingness, but where the beingness is not very body-centric, or it doesn't have a sense of being in the body, but being bigger picture sort of awareness, witnessing from the point of awareness. Now that sounds very similar to the oneness experience. It's very related. It just doesn't have that absoluteness that the peak experience, the absolute absoluteness of the peak experience. And so you can live for years in this sort of witnessing state. And at some point, it becomes evident that that's not what it's all about, that living in that witnessing state has delivered something quite significant in terms of a detachment, something has changed in the brain. But thankfully, I found myself in front of Ramesh, and he was sort of like slapping me, saying, come back down to earth. And you know, when he asked me who's speaking to whom, and I said, it's, you know, everything is happening in consciousness. Consciousness is speaking to consciousness. He was essentially saying, come on, let's be pragmatic. Let's talk about the sun as if it's rising and setting. In practice, Roger is speaking to Ramesh, and Ramesh listens, and then Ramesh speaks to Roger, and Roger listens. And in that witnessing state, the acknowledgement of Roger is sort of, Roger just becomes a thing, an inconvenience in a way, or it's just something that's there, the body.
Yeah, it just feels like phenomena, like there's nothing particularly, like when I can get those glimpses, it feels like my sense of separate self is just phenomena, no more important than any other phenomena.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's very good to have that for a period of time, because it helps in grounding oneself into the conscious or the awareness aspect of self. It helps at breaking attachment to outcomes, because we realize, as there is more and more viewing from that perspective, that things are not as important as they seem. essentially circumstance, pleasure and pain. At some point, so it's very useful, but at some point it starts being not useful. And that's when we essentially need to say, well, maybe I have always been Roger, and I've just been in a state of a different state of Roger, or Roger experiencing life from this impersonal state that at the time feels like it's not Roger experiencing life, but maybe it always was Nathan or Roger. But the human being has this capacity to essentially feel like it's not a human being while it is a human being. And so if that's the case, so when it's happening, the initial assumption based on how it feels is, oh, what I am is consciousness that is bigger than the human being. That's what it feels like. But maybe that's us connecting to the consciousness of the human being, and it has this capacity to feel different, to feel like it's not the human being. But just because something feels a particular way, it doesn't mean it is that way. And then the more that we challenge what's actually going on, we might realize, oh, maybe this is part of Roger and Nathan, and maybe the whole point is not to just hang out as consciousness, but to live as Roger, live as Nathan. So
would you say would you say that then that stage where you come back to the sense of sort of a separate person or self, when you're in that experience of being the regular person, the understanding and the experience of the wider consciousness state means that then the separate person is without suffering because of just an awareness of I'm actually something more than this. Is that where the sort of the peace of mind comes in?
I think what happens is that in that process of not being the person, or feeling yourself as if you're not the person, a lot of changes happen, and a lot of the suffering falls away in that process. I don't think that all of the suffering falls away in that process, but it does mean that there's a capacity to come into the human being again with less of a load of suffering, and then the remaining load of suffering can be processed and understood from being a human being again. And as more is processed, then essentially there is less of a root from which suffering can arise. And so it's not so much about saying I'm much more than this human. It's more appreciating I am this human. The human had so many beliefs in it that used to mean I felt like I was essentially just a physical human being, or just a physical body with thoughts and emotions, and all of this load of doership and attachment. So really from there, the human experience was one of misunderstanding and suffering. As that load starts getting cleared out and there is an appreciation of the conscious aspect, then we come back and we live as a human being with an appreciation of our own consciousness, which is a place that we can rest and feel secure regardless of unfortunate outcomes that are bound to be happening in life. And that's a very important ground to have, to be able to rest in being. But we tend to rest in being in an embodied sense. So when we rest in being, we're not finding that we're saying, oh, I'm not a human, I'm not a person. It's like, oh, I am a human, I am a person, but I'm not the doer. I'm being lived by life, and furthermore, it doesn't change as I succeed or fail in circumstance, and that's a very precious thing, because it means that all of the things that we used to sort of be thrown off course by, pleasure and pain, no longer throw us off course in the same way, because we know ourselves at our core differently, but essentially say, I'm a human being.
Okay. Right. I think I have, probably many more questions that I think I'll have to ask you maybe next time.
Yeah, you're welcome to do that. At the end of the day, another thing I should emphasize is that the process unfolds not according to what I'm saying, because someone might have all sorts of insights that are going to happen in their own. So I'm talking about just general concepts and understandings that will fall into place one way or another, but it will unfold as it's going to unfold. And so don't let the things I'm saying interfere with letting life unfold, because that's the beauty of the seeking, when it becomes clear we're not doing it and it's just happening. And what might be relevant for Roger is not necessarily relevant for Nathan at this point in time. It's and vice versa. So we really need to allow the process to just take us where it's going to take us.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's so true. I mean, when I first listened to the teaching that you and Ramesh have proposed, my understanding of what was being said is so different to what my understanding of it now is, and I'm sure in another few months my understanding will be completely different again. And it does. It's a combination of getting those ideas from you and from other sources as well, and then life just providing those insights and changes as it does.
Indeed. Oh,
great.
Which part of Australia are you in, Nathan?
I actually grew up not far from where you live. I grew up in Kalamunda, so not too far.
Oh, good. Yeah, we me and my girlfriend spend some Sundays there enjoying the markets and the cafes, etc.
Nice. Yeah, beautiful.
Good. Okay.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks, Nathan. So on that note, I don't think there's any more hands up. I will say farewell, and I think I'm scheduled again in another 2 weeks. Information's on the website. And also anyone interested in joining the retreat in September, I think 1st of September in Maribor in Slovenia. And that's also on the website. It looks like it will be a fun week. Thank you, everybody.